everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Now, this is a bit of I don't want to say a last minute decision because I'm in an uhring about it. And I've decided that this video is going to be covering the, I don't want to say the magic system of Aphalas, but it's certainly up there in terms of prominence. And it's going to be basically a breakdown of each of the different magical systems, the sort of inspiration behind the names and things, although once the pan gets a bit established, for those who are into sort of like gemstones and that, you'll see the pattern very quickly. But I've been wanting to do this one for a while, and because it's something a little bit different, and there are a few other lore videos that I'm scheming, but they're ones that honestly need a bit of prep before I do them, and I just have not had the time to do them yet. But we will begin with this one, right? And I'm just going to say I'm doing the recording raw footage. None of the images are actually up aside from the map. So a lot of this will be photos that are edited on, and there's not going to be a lot of map movement. But then again, there doesn't really have to be for this. There might be some zoomed in images. So just keep that all in mind in case there is a bit of wonky editing at points. Hopefully there won't be. But anyway. Aphalas' magic system is, or Aphalas's magic system is, it's not intensely magic based. There is a lot of like mystical elements and things, but they're not high fantasy in the same regard of like you don't have like the heavy cases like chaos corruption in Warhammer or things like that, or even things like the Fell in Warcraft, or is it the Fell in the games and the books, or is that just the film? I can't remember off the top of my head. But as things have developed, a couple of other bits have become a bit more like that, but for the most part they kind of keep relatively grounded, and there are established rules in the lore for that. But the main basis is I will go off of the first 5, and then I will list off the somewhat newer additions to it. So the first one I want to establish is, well, actually we'll go off the context of one of the we will go off the context of one of the main characters in the trilogy, and we will go for the Dracon Myloth and what his baseline is and his magic proficiency, which is obsidian. Obsidian is the study of, and this is the key part here, the study of limited necromancy. It's not full on, oh, we can just raise the dead and we can bring forward all these creatures and everything. It's limited, and the reasons behind that is the Dracons are arguably, even with the introduction of the Kirin Drake, the Dracons can still be argued to be the most magical of the Protector races. Like, the magic physically runs in their veins, and if they're a certain type of Dracon, that is. And they have the training areas with the Narrakon in here, for the different towers of enchanting. Obsidian is one of them. And they focus on the rule sets, and because there are a lot of dutiful rules in Aphalas, the trolls have their own, and one of them is quite hostile towards their people becoming magic wielders because they don't necessarily believe it. Is one of the reasons why Olacron became such a rogue. And then you've got other elements like, again, the Dracons, who are much more open to it. And these were gifts through their creation, gifts through Galeria and elements, but the obsidian magic the limitations on it are the limitations by what they are taught and the rule sets, and if they get beyond that, if they start exploring above that, they get deemed as a threat or a risk. And the limited necromancy has a lot of different styles, and I will, if I can find the edit, I will dig up the pictures for the spell lists I did for the Aphalas D&D, because that Aphalas D&D for the most part is canon, and yes, okay, some of the spells might be tweaked for the canon from the D&D, but a lot of them are there. But one of the most notable about Obsidian is something like Withering, which pretty much feels like the life essence is like getting basically pulled out, and they become slower and they start to become more sluggish. You've also got the things of being able to do, again, the limitations on so it's like it has the sort of draining effects that some horror kind of characters. I mean, when I think about it, the first thing that comes to mind is something like the apathy from Ruby, but that's a limited reference. But you've got a mix of those sort of things, the sort of things that can basically, I mean, from a gaming perspective, it would be prevent debuffs and things, and just slowness, not illness, because it's not plague or things, but there are areas of that. And then there is limited necromancy, like being able to summon forward like ghastly spirit hands and things. So you can't craft or bring up a full undead figure, but you can bring up parts and have the sort of limitation for a brief time. And again, it's like most magic systems, it can be draining to constantly try and sustain it. And I do quite like the Obsidian one as a sort of pick because of that limitations to the necromancy, because it's primarily used by the protector races. It's primarily used by, and beyond that, it is with the exception of a few characters, it is primarily used by the Dracons, a people who are, yes, a couple may go rogue, but they cannot be corrupted. They are immune to corruptive powers. And so having that sort of limitation on a necromancy type thing, but having that on the side of good is something a bit different. But then during the Crisis of Galakaros, one of Senetvia's chief lieutenants is a ogre who was trained in enchantment in Obsidian to the limited point, and then broke off and learnt the corruptive stuff. And the corruptive stuff, I will get into how that works in a little while, because it's different to the rest of them in some cases. But yeah, Obsidian is the first portal, and yes, the most notable character for it is Myloth. I know he hasn't had a lore video yet, but that was to try and stop spoilers from the books, so but there's been a few notable ones now. You've got him, you've got Olacron the troll from the D&D and some of the other lore bits. You've got that ogre whose name's escaping me at the moment. But I mean, that ogre did a single duel with one of the kings of Saragarth and ended up killing him, but also losing an arm in the process. So, but moving on from Obsidian, and we will go to the complete opposite to the sort of undeath and necromancy, to the one that's more focused not so much around life, but around rejuvenation and healing, and that's Sapphire. And now, before I go into any sort of detail about the Sapphire kind of spells or anything, it's healing. It's healing and rejuvenation, so, and being able to keep up stamina and things. So it's probably the most self-explanatory of all of them. The one thing I will note is that there is actually a species in the lore that have Sapphire specifically built within them, or built within them, but runs through them in their veins, and that's the kingfishers. The kingfisher, it was a gift from Amendiel, the scribe of nature. He imbued them with the ability of Sapphire so they could help sustain the forces, especially against things like the demons who can be relentless and stuff. So you have that element, but I'm trying to know if there are any. I think there's about one named character at the moment who's a Sapphire Enchanter, and they don't really have any sort of combat prowess or things. Like, obviously the Obsidian's not like direct combat, it's more like restraining or slowing, but yeah, Sapphire's is the opposite. It's all about supporting, it's not about trying to remove or take away. So it is, if you were to put all the magics or all the enchantments, because I refer to them as enchanting quite a bit, if you were to put them all on a spectrum from good to evil, Sapphire would be dead on the top of good. And Obsidian would drift around sort of like the middling of darker, but it wouldn't be right at the end. So you have that element as well, which also means and this is the other aspect, with the exception of a species that I will get into a little bit later, it is quite rare to have people who are trained in multiple aspects of magic. It's something that is not common, which is why there's no necessarily named character in here, and to be perfectly honest, if they were, they would be deemed a bit of a risk. Especially if they had a mix of like necromancy and healing. It would be like, but now we're getting into the more, or the less sort of supportive ones, and the ones that are more associated to, I don't want to strictly say combat, but more direct. But keeping with the mind from going to the subtle to the heaviest, we're actually going to focus on Emerald next. And Emerald is a magic that is purely based around material, and it works in both ways. You can take away and you can also bolster. So, and that's where it's boosted throughout like the D&D spells and the lore and everything, and it's also where a lot of the warrior enchanters end up using, because there are two different kinds of enchanters. There are those who are the direct magic ones, and then you've got those who balance magic and actual like melee or frontline combat, so they drift between the two. And I know that the character who I actually had in the D&D, who was Raunor, the ogre from Hedotelic, he is a Emerald warrior enchanter. I also know that Cersei, one of the Kirindrek, was also an Emerald enchanter. Can't remember if warrior. I don't think it was warrior. But Emerald magic is focused around material, but by material I don't just mean like wood or stone. I mean like it can get translated into structures, armor, weapons, and you can do it either way. You can use it to lower, or not lower, but potentially damage enemy weaponry or the effectiveness of the armor, like by adding it. There's things like Brittle Forge is quite a big one, which basically causes cracks to appear in an enemy's armor, or there's others where they can weaken the effectiveness of weapons, so they just smag, and then you've got the opposite. It is a magic probably more than any other that can give and also take away. It can, and makes it quite effective to be bolstering armies. Like you can support the armor or the effectiveness of the weapons of your own, of the infantry in front of you, or you could protect or you could make the piercing of the arrows more intense for your archers or things, or you could do the polar opposite and have them potentially just lose their structural integrity in midair or something, so they just end up showering. So there's a lot of different universal abilities with Emerald. You can use it in forging as well, so you can just forge stronger elements. And yeah, it is one of those little unique things that, again, it's not a direct combat one, but it's one that can seriously bolster or, if need be, hinder combat. But yeah, like, honestly, like the Sapphire ones, and to an extent like the Obsidian ones, they are at risk. They are, especially the enchanters, not the warrior enchanters, they are far more at risk because they have no spells that can really protect themselves. I mean, you can heal the wounds and things, but you can only heal them for so long before energy runs dry or power runs dry, and if you're getting a relentless onslaught from a load of demons, you're not going to last long. And even if you... I mean, I say it about material and like inanimate. That's the specific thing, inanimate objects and things. So if you have got a load of like demons coming after you, you could shatter their weapons, you could weaken their armor, but they're still chaotic beings and they would still find a way to get you. So you have that element as well. So we've done Obsidian, we've done Sapphire, we've done Emerald. So next is Ruby. Ruby is trickery in the form of a magic. Its whole basis is on illusion. And that is the grand summary of it. Its whole idea is about deception, stealth, help to set up ambushes, can elude to things. But it can also do other things like the Talamarith line of people with Becca Quinn Loneseer. She is the Becca Quinn the painter. She gets visions, and the visions come because whilst her family are not enchanters, they have ended up with a blessing of Ruby that runs through their bloodline, and because of that blessing of Ruby, they have this odd way of being able to have visions manifest, and then they translate them to showcase if they become problems or if they become threats. Like, she does it to perceive future potential threats that are going on, and because of that she got hunted, and because of that she ended up having to leave Talamarith and actually end up resting with the trolls in Idros. And again, that's a bit of a weird one, seeing as the trolls are the most against magic, but they're also they're one of the most dutiful towards protecting Aphalas, so it's a bit of a compromise on their part. But to visualize her visions, she paints them to show the threats. And yeah, it's... So Ruby is about basically the manipulation of the senses, and that's another term for it, is like Obsidian and Sapphire are the manipulations of sort of life and death in some cases. Emerald is the manipulation of material and the inanimate. Ruby is the manipulation of the senses. And I think I may have said Obsidian and Sapphire is the manipulation of the senses. I meant life. I meant life and death. So they're like the manipulation of the soul almost. And so you have Ruby with that, and there are a few characters that do have Ruby mentions. I know for one, and one of the big ones is the last goblin leader of Northern Haraketh, and I will get on to proper lore videos about Galakaros in detail, but Yitzhak. And or Yikir, either or, and he he was the last leader of the goblins of Northern Haraketh, who unfortunately do get wiped out during Galakaros. But during a raid, the raid that was actually a stupid attempt to actually try and slay Senetvia, which ended up with multiple dead leaders, including the King of the Dwarfs, and also several royal family members of the Ogres. Yitzhak, in a final act of defiance, he does get away. It's the final battle. He actually falls, but he casts such a large ruby spell that then pretty much goes on to completely siphon the rest of his magic over a incredibly long stretch of time. But what he basically did was he made it seem to everyone, including Senetvia, who is one of the original beings, one of the creators, one of the all-powerful magic ones, and he was able to deceive and trick her and all of her legions into thinking that the fire pits, the things that produce the Mieda demons and the Korith Adar demons, and just any of the demons, its fires had gone out. They had extinguished, and it took a long time for them to figure out why, and it took an age to consolidate, and it caused a lot of commotion to the current campaigns that Senetvia was conducting, and it ended up lasting for a long while. It did eventually fade out because he just could not maintain it anymore, but yes, he maintained it for a very, very long time. I think in the current law writing, it's established that he manages to make that go on for a couple of years. So it is an incredibly large feat, and it does. I know there haven't been too many magic users actually established in the lore as of yet, but short of the ones who actually use the Staff of Shar or things like that, or the original creators, it makes him probably one of the strongest that have already been established, even though in the grand scheme of the laws, he is there, and he will get more depth, as will the Goblins of North Haraketh, because they are quite a tragic story, but yeah, it was a pretty intense effort for him, and he managed to maintain it. And yeah, it's all about manipulating the senses, tricking, deceiving. It's not just a case of illusion of, oh, it's just illusion of the eyes. No, it's illusion of the eyes, smell, sound, even other things like, yes, even potentially touch and stuff. So in a lot of ways, despite Ruby not being at all combative, it has no ability to fight or withhold or bolster. It is all about manipulation. It is still, and this is the thing about what I tried to do with the Aphalas magic system. I tried to make each of these magical systems the ability to stand on their own. Like, they are all powerful in their own right. It's not just, oh, why would someone go for this one? It seems pretty useless. It's like, no, they all have their established feats. They all have the ability. And if you want bolstering for combat, you can go, in terms of your weaponry or material, you go Emerald. You want to be stealthy, you want to trick or deceive or be sneaky. Like, I could imagine, and I think I have actually jotted it down at some point, that sometime I might end up coming up with creators or a small order that might involve assassins who manipulate ruby magic or things like that. Then you've got, obviously, Sapphire if you want to heal, Obsidian if you want to do the opposite of healing. So, and then the final one, and the one that probably has the most noted characters so far, you've got Faraki, you've got, I say the most noted characters, and then I can only think of one. There are others, I do know that. There's a few. I don't actually think there are that many. I will have to jot down a list of the established characters who are all magic, but the last one of the original 5 is Feldspar. And Feldspar is the manipulation of nature. And it is by far the most heavy, based around like combat and things, as in you can effectively weaponize the elements, the natural elements. One of Faraki's favourite things throughout his time and things is manipulating things like using the winds to like distort or like just simple like pulses that cast people out. But it's also the magic that has the closest connection to the dragons, because the dragons are limited but elemental. So, and there's just all sorts of different things. Cursed Wanderer, another figure, he is a very heavy Feldspar user. And Rornay Stormcast, one who's been noted in a lot of the recent lore videos, he is also a Feldspar enchanter. So I knew there were some. And yeah, it has such a massive variety of different things they can do. Conjure mini sort of earthquakes, use the wind blast, cast up vines. You can do all sorts. One of the things I know gets noted a few times is using like whisper type spells to effectively burn up projectiles, manipulation of fire, and using them to physically just burn and break down arrows mid-flight and things like that. Sorry, Steam's going off and going bonkers. So you have that, and yeah, it's almost, there's so much that Feldspar can do that it's not necessarily one I can really go into as much detail about, because I would say out of all of them, aside from maybe Sapphire, is probably the most self-explanatory. And it's also one of the reasons why Rornay is such a credible threat, because he's pretty much... Yeah, I think he is the only established Kunroke in terms of the Reclaimers for Nagrasag who is noted to be an enchanter. So he's a skilled warrior, he's a proficient sailor, and he's a proficient sailor who can manipulate nature, which includes the wind and the waves. So, yes, quite prominent and deadly. But anyway, there are currently 3 others to go down. And I will start with the one that came into being after I came up with the Kirindrek. Guard Realm of Arakirin, the Kirindrek. And that is one that is strictly limited to them. And that is Agate. Agate is the arcane. And I know that the terminology for arcane gets used in different cases depending on what world you're looking at. In this case, it's basically the magic of almost like physical manifestations of energy. Like you can come up with sort of shields and blasts and things. It is by far the most combative of the lot of them. There are some other things that you can do on a more subtle approach, like you can bolster. So it does have elements of Sapphire and a couple of other things. It's like a combination of some of them, and it was specifically given to the Kirindrek as a gift by the creators. And yeah, it's also why, alongside the Dracons, they are the other magical protector race. But they are a bit different, where yes, they have the Agate, but they also refuse to use things like Obsidian or Feldspar because they see them as too damaging to the natural world. So they're almost like a mix. They're almost like, in terms of the way they view magic, they're almost like a mix of the Dracons and the Trolls. And I haven't mentioned the Wood Elves or the Forest Dwarfs into this yet, and I will be completely clear. No, there is no established character at the moment in the lore for the Forest Dwarfs who is a magic user. The Half Ogres are a bit more out there, but the Wood Elves have Farrakey and a couple of other notable ones involved. So just a little footnote there. And it's the same with the Ajati. The Ajati, I have plans to add one in, but they're not hostile to the magic. It's just they don't really. It's almost like they're not that invested in it, to be honest, or interested. However, I say that, and yet they get in charge of a ancient prophecy of magic. So, but the Kirindrek, and if you've seen the other lore videos, one thing you'll hear me note a few times is the Aphalas barrier, the A-gate barrier. And yes, that is a shield that got built up in the aftermath of the Aphalas Shadow Dance all across Arasin. The entire continent gets conjured up, and Kirindrek switch out with each other to ensure that they can continue bolstering it. But there is another rare thing about the Kirindrek, and that's A-gate was a gift to them. It was a gift. It's not. They can have the option to learn it. They don't have to. But they also have access to. Well, they have access to all the magics if they want, but they refuse Obsidian and Feldspar, so they can still use Sapphire, Emerald, and Ruby. So they can use those in conjunction with the A-gate, which in some cases does make some of the Kirindrek potentially some of the most powerful magical users on Aphalas, but the drawbacks as well kind of balance it with the Dragons a bit more. I mean, it's subjective and debatable which one is more powerful, and unless I write in a, well, even if I write in a war between the two of them, it's like, you can't really judge that on analytics because I'm the creator, but they have. The interesting note is, though, despite them having that gift, they are not immune to corruption. So they get this higher powerful gift, but they are also more susceptible. So, and they do use it wisely. It's an energy power. It is notably more draining than the other magics, but they can also use it in conjunction with some of the others, so it makes them more versatile. They can bolster up different things, and I will be honest, when it came around to doing the D&D, because the D&D is focused on Arasin primarily, it took me ages to actually come up with spells for them, longer than the rest. But it is also something that they hold incredibly dear. Like, if any of the darker forces around Aphalas were able to get a hold of A-gate magic, the amount of power that they could utilise from that would be devastating. And yeah, it is, and the barrier is held for years and years and years, and even throughout the entirety of the trilogy, the barrier is still up. And considering that I'm planning to set Shadow Dance to, I don't think around the time of Tonreef's War, I think it might be a little bit before that, just to work the timeline out. But if that is the case, then that still means that the barrier that cuts Arasin off from the rest of Aphalas, short of some exceptions like the Ajati or traders or things just to keep some connection, it does mean that that's been going on for at the very least over 300 years. So it's been a long while, and considering I noted about Yitzhak with the Ruby spell and the struggle for just 2, you can imagine how draining this is on the Kirindrek, which is also why in a lot of cases, especially after that point, the Kirindrek become more reserved and don't necessarily launch full campaigns into dealing with like bandit forces in the steppes or go after the ice elves or things, or even these new snow demons or stuff. It's because they can't. They're so focused on maintaining this barrier, and this barrier got created for the. There was a couple of reasons, but the primary reason is because Shadow Dance nearly brought forward brought forward the corruption of a very powerful figure, and if that had happened, then a whole lot of Aphalas would have ended up getting devastated. And between that and what Rorne tried to scheme and all of these other things, Arisins had a lot of different, very magical based threats happen. So it was a decision to cut it off, basically. Similar to how Honor Kivris got cut off by the Ruby Mist. And again, Ruby Mist, the manipulation of the senses, unable to see the land, unable to focus your senses on it, too many confusions, leads to shipwrecks sometimes and stuff. So for one, there's like this physical barrier that you just cannot like physically break through, and on the other you've got this barrier of trickery and manipulation. So it's kind of a different stake there. And then you've got the other two. Now, I'm going to make a note of this one first, mainly because it's the newest one and it has not been explored that much, because effectively it is like an incredibly precise version of Feldspar. It's a precise version of Feldspar, and also, in some cases, Emerald is like maybe a mini mix of the two. And that's what the Last Prince and the vampires end up gaining, and that's the ability to earthbend. And it stems from the people who they were. Again, it was a people that had it established into them, but unlike the Kirindrek and the Dracons, these people did not survive long enough. And that's the Stone Elves. The Stone Elves had the ability to bend the earth, to twist it and manifest it and things. But they got locked into a civil war. Not a civil war, they got locked into a brutal conflict against the Beast Elves, and it ended up spiraling out, and it ended up with most of them being wiped out, aside from the Last Prince and who he was able to flee with. And now with the vampiric stuff. Now, the vampiric stuff I'm not going to make a massive note of, because truth be told, it hasn't got that much detail behind it yet, so that's still in the works. But the earthbending is effectively how they've been able to craft subterranean cities as well. So it's a power that is quite limited to them. And so I will just make a quick note of that one, but then we're on to the last one, and the one that is much more orientated to A, the darker forces, and B, the one that is more unique. And that's corruptive magic. And now, the corruptive magic, maybe like the earthbending, is name work in progress. The names may change for these things to kind of suit the pattern, or they may stay separate. I don't quite know yet. But the corruptive magic, Senhetvia, who taught it to Nagrasak, and it was effectively a blend of that and the earth and different things that allowed the creations of the first demons and the rest of the demonic creatures on Aphalas, so their source is entirely within that. But the other element of it, yeah, because the demon, this is the thing, the demons in Aphalas are not like creatures who come through a portal. The demons in Aphalas are more like physical corruptions of the earth. It's corruptive magic blended with the earth in these monstrous things called fire pits, and they just get spawned out, chaotic, disturbing, and all the rest of it. But corruptive magic also gets utilised against other figures. Most of the time it's manipulation and trickery into getting them to serve the will. It's happened to a couple of the trolls, it's happened to various others, it's happened to humans, it's happened to all sorts. One of the most notable ones that get targeted by it, especially by the Ice Elves, are the Kirindrek, who they the Ice Elves effectively try and hunt the Kirindrek when they've got raiding parties or things, or at least they were before Shadow Dance. And when the Kirindrek got captured, they would get corrupted. And it's not corrupted in terms of the magic siphon because they've been able to withhold that. No, the corruption that the Kirindrek end up receiving is they basically get turned mindless. And considering that we're talking about characters that resemble humanoid white tigers, you can sort of imagine how that goes. And so on the face value, corruptive magic is manipulation and twisting, but it's not just twisting of like minds or things, it can actually twist the magics as well. I noted earlier about the ogre who did the obsidian. The corruptive magic managed to push the obsidian beyond the teaching and unlock the full things, which made him one of the few ever genuine necromancers on Aphalas. And yeah, with that kind of power under Senevia's command, the sort of destruction that got wrought was pretty extensive. And it just twists and bends the different magics. It gives them a darker tone, not a darker tone, but it just gives them a darker side to it. It makes them more chaotic, more erratic. Erratic's the word I was trying to think of. And yeah, so you've got these different magics, and there's been hints of how it affects Feldspar. It tends to be more destructive. It tends to be more associated to like crafting out massive storms and things. It's been utilised with Obsidian. I have not actually looked at it being utilised for Ruby, Emerald, or Sapphire yet, although the ways that they could be used, like, I did have an idea of the way it could be utilised is like corruptive magic on Sapphire could lead to sickness and things. So, but yes, and this is something that Senevia knew how to do, taught to Nagrasak, and then very few others have ever been able to do it. There's a limited amount of it that characters like Tonreef can do, but it's not to the same extent. But yeah, so just to recap, we have, just going back across because there's not too much more I can really go into it. Again, like, this is something that will obviously have more development in the future, but yeah, just a baseline idea of how the magics, well, basically how the different types of magic operate in Aphalas, and a few examples that are already in the lore. Or I tried to hint at little things in the books without delivering too many spoilers. So you've got corruptive, which is what it says on the tin. It is the corruption of anything. You've got earthbending, which is a specific emerald and feldspar mix, which is heavily tied to the stone elves turn vampires. You've got Agate, which is the gift of Agate, which is closest to arcane magic and physical energy and things like that. And then you have the 5. You have Ruby, the manipulation of the senses. You have Emerald, the manipulation of material. Feldspar, the manipulation of nature. Sapphire, the I guess the bolstering or manipulation of life. And then Obsidian, the manipulation of undeath. And then, just as a final note, because I've noted about a few different magical creatures here, the Ice Elves, when they got corrupted, because the Ice Elves managed to obtain and learn different forms of magic, it was effectively a twisted version of the sort of Council of Mages, which comes a little bit later, where there was a representative of sort of each form, minus Agate and Earthbending. But the thing about the Ice Elves is because how they became the Ice Elves, each of these magics was a twisted version. It was not inherently corruption in itself, but each of their magics had that corruptive sign because they were twisted. So, yeah, that is all I have to say on that, and I'm hoping to have this video out the Sunday following, which will be 2 days after doing the recording. That depends how the editing and the annotations go. They might end up being Monday. But I hope you all enjoyed. Please do check out the Payhib if you would like to pick up a copy of Liberation of Destiny or Code of Chivalry or Soul of the Gem, as that is the new web store. You can also support the channel over on the Ko-fi and pick up the other works there as well. You can check me out on Twitch and things. Currently I stream Tuesday, Thursday and Friday. It tends to be, well, the Tuesday one tends to be a little bit later, sort of like mid to sort of like 6:30 through to about 8. Thursday and Friday tend to be more early, late afternoon, early evening, that sort of cross. And they do vary from time to time and things, but it's still a little bit up in the air. However, that's got that and everything. All the links will be in the description. Please do comment, like and subscribe, and please do share, and welcome to the kingdom of Aphalas and the world of Fellowmind books. Thank you all for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed. And if you would like to see some similar content to this one, you can click there. Or if you would like to change around and have an explore of some of the other content, then you can check out the link below, which will be to a playlist. And if you would like to check out the content on other pages or socials, or if you would like to explore some of the other elements in detail, or pick up a book or whatever, or come and chat to me on Twitch when I'm alive, then down there. And as you can see, it has a list of what to expect on each of those platforms. And until next time, welcome to the kingdom of Aphalas, the world of Fellowmind books. Please do like, please do subscribe, and if you want to, pop out a comment.